All right. Very good evening to everyone this evening. Glad to have you with us in Margaret Street Church of Christ at our Bible study for Sunday night is Revelation Real. Is Revelation for Real. We are going to be studying the book of Revelation, and we tonight are going to be studying in chapters 17 through 19. So if you want to go ahead and grab your Bibles and grab a notepad, we're going to be studying the book of Revelation, chapters 17 through 19. A continuation of a study we've been doing now for several weeks. I would invite you to go back to our YouTube channel, and there you can see many of the different lessons we've done in the past leading up to this point. And you might notice, some of you that are joining us and have been joining us now for these several weeks, that the scenery is a little bit different. And indeed, I am back in the auditorium, and the only reason for that is simply because I got tired of carrying the cameras and the lights and all the equipment down to my office. It's a lot of work. I'm hoping to get something new to be able to use in my office so I can return to my office then. But for now, we're using the system that is here in the auditorium. And so I hope everything will work just the way we've done it in the past. We've got connections here, waiting for a few people to log on. I'm going to check Facebook here as well and some of the other ones to make sure that we're getting connections and all. So if you are joining us, we're glad to have you with us. And we are studying as Revelation for Real. And grab your Bible. Let's turn to Revelation chapter 17 is where we're going to be tonight. Revelation chapter 17. I'm trying to see if I can pull this up here on the Facebook channel. I don't see it there. Let me go to the YouTube while we're waiting on a few people to log in. It always takes a couple of minutes to get everybody connected, logged on. I see, looks like we already got several watching on the YouTube channel, so that's good. Glad to have you with us. You're watching us on our website, as well as I see now people are logging in on Facebook. Facebook has popped up now, so it looks like everything is starting to work just fine. Once again, welcome to Revelation for Real. That's what we're studying tonight. We're going to be in chapter 17. And as I was stating just a moment ago, while some of you are still logging on, I'm double checking things here. The scenery is a little bit different. I moved back into the auditorium. And using the equipment here, I have my lovely bride, Andrea, is pushing all the buttons up there for me. She pushes my buttons anyway, in a good way. And so she is helping me out tonight by making sure the live stream is working and everything's good. I see now we've got several people logged on. Wonderful. Grab your Bibles. Let's go to Revelation chapter 17, in a continuation of our Bible study that we've been doing, an overview of the book of Revelation. This has been a great study that we've had up to this point. I've thoroughly enjoyed it and thankful for those who've been a part of it. And tonight, we're going to continue with this outline. I got to get there we go. It's on that side right there. Here we go. This outline that we have. And that is, we take the book of Revelation and we've broken it into 7 parts. The number 7 is seen all throughout the book of Revelation. And so that number works really well because not only can you break it into 7 parts, but then there's 7 components in those parts. As you see that we've done in the past with some of these. Let me pull this up so I can read what I've got going. We had the first 3 chapters were those 7 churches of Asia. And so naturally there was that natural 7 division. And then you go right into the next one, and that next one being the 7 seals of judgment. And the 7 candles, you have the candlesticks, the 7 seals of judgment. Then you have the 7 trumpets. Trying to see, what do we have on the screen there, Andrea, that's up there right now? Does that say? All right. Now we have the 7 trumpets, right? This monitor is just far enough away that I can't see exactly what's going on, but good enough to be able to follow on. So then we have the 7 trumpets. Once again, that number 7 in there. So then when we get into chapter 12 through 14, which we studied the last few weeks, we get into the 7 symbolic figures. You could claim or say that maybe there are more than 7 figures, but there are definitely 7 identifiable figures in there, which is why I divided it in that way. And as you see there, we talked about that woman, a child, the dragon, the beast of the sea, the beast of the earth, those marked by the beast, and the harlot, Babylon. And that's important to remember that, because that, here we go again, my numbers, that one right there, that's what we're going to continue with tonight, because now we're going to start to see more information developed from these 7 characters. And then, of course, then the next thing that we had were those 7 bowls of wrath that we talked about last week. And so that brings us to our next one, which is this 7-fold judgment. And so there on the screen you can see that outline. And by the way, I've updated that outline on our sermon notes, which you can find on our website, or the website that we've been putting those on. Each week I add to it, and so now this one is on there as well. So that's what we're going to look at tonight, this 7-fold judgment. Again, you could divide this up into more parts or anything, but since we've been using the number 7, since the Bible naturally divides Revelation into 7 parts and uses the number 7, we're going to go with this and talk about a 7-fold judgment. I'll just check in real quick, Andrea. Everything is good with stream and all? All right. So let's read Revelation chapter 17, and then we'll break down these verses for you. We're just going to cover 17 tonight because there's so much between, as you can see in the outline right here, there's so much between chapters 17 through 19. 17 through 19. Before we start reading, I just remember I was so focused on making sure that everything was set up for the live stream and everything was working properly that I forgot a major announcement. And that major announcement is that tonight at midnight, they're going to be taking Leanne Bearden up to the hospital. She's going to be induced tonight. And so the Bearden family and the Bird family is asking for your prayers tonight. They will have a healthy baby, and Mama will go through everything just fine. We're excited to see the addition to the Bearden family and a healthy baby boy. And so we ask you for their prayers, and be sure and keep them in mind as tonight is the big night. So remember them. Okay, so let's read chapter 17. As I was saying, there's so much between chapter 17 and 19 and so many important elements that we're only going to look at chapter 17 tonight. And basically what it is the condemnation of the harlot. It's as you see on the outline here, it is the introductory material, if you will, of this 6th vision that John is receiving. And so we've seen the dragon, we've seen the woman, we've seen the beast, we've seen even the mention of this harlot. Well, now we're getting into detail. So remember that as we're reading, and then we'll break down the verses even more. Then one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came and talked with me, saying to me, "Come, I will show you the judgment of the great harlot who sits on many waters, to whom the kings of the earth committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth were made drunk with the wine of her fornication. So he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast, which was full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was arrayed with purple and scarlet and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, having in her hand a golden cup full of abominations and the filthiness of her fornication. And on her forehead a name was written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and of abominations of the earth. And I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints and the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. And when I saw her, I marveled with great amazement. But the angel said to me, Why did you marvel? I tell you the mystery of the woman and the beast that carries her, which has the 7 heads and the 10 horns. The beast that you saw was and is not, and will ascend out of the bottomless pit and go to perdition. And those who dwell on the earth will marvel, whose names are not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they see the beast that was and is not and yet is. Here is the mind which has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. There are also 7 kings, 5 fallen, 1 is, and the other has yet to come, and when he comes, he must continue a short time. And the beast that was and is not is himself also the 8th, and is of the 7, and is going to perdition. And the 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings, and have received no kingdom as yet, but they receive authority for 1 hour as kings with the beast. These are of one mind, and they will give power and authority to the beast. These will make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb will overcome them, and he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and those who are with him are called chosen and faithful. And he said to me, the waters which you saw where the harlot sits are peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. And the 10 horns which you saw on the beast, these will hate the harlot, make her desolate and naked, eat her flesh, and burn her with fire. For God has put into their hearts to fulfill his purpose, and to be of one mind, and to give their kingdom to the beast, until the words of God are fulfilled. And the woman whom you saw is the great city which reigns over the kings of the earth. You know, it seems like every time that we read another chapter in the book of Revelation, it just seems to get more and more intense. And that's on purpose, because this is a vision that is being revealed, and we can't even begin to imagine what John saw in totality. He's relaying all that he can possibly relay to us in earthly terms, and so you can just imagine how much there must have been that he saw. Now, to clarify things, you know, many times I've talked about how some people will take and they will put all the events. I talked about those 7 churches and the 7 candlesticks and the 7 seals and all the different things, and they will take and they'll put them in a line, one right after another, leading from the cross going all the way up to the judgment day. And I've said many times, showing this graphic, that no, that's not how it is. Actually showing this graphic once again of how really what it is, it's the same time period, just repeated. You're backing up and looking at it from a different perspective. It's kind of like a movie scene telling you the same story from different perspectives, is one way of looking at that. And so I've used this graphic here to show you that each time we're just backing right back up to the beginning. We're going back to the cross and looking at from the cross all the way up to the end of time, all the way up to judgment. Well, that's exactly what's happening here again. We just saw in the previous chapters, we just saw those 7 bowls of wrath. And we saw this picture of judgment. Well, now what's happening is the vision, the angel's taking John and backing up, and now going to go in with more detail and explain some of these things that he has seen. He's going to go back in detail and explain things, not only the stuff that he saw in the 7 bowls, but now he's going to see it even in those 7 symbolic figures, the 7 trumpets. Everything is going to start making more and more sense as we go through this chapter and start seeing this first introduction to the harlot, this condemnation of the harlot. And then next what we're going to see is we're going to see the fall of the harlot. And then when we get to chapters 19, you're going to start seeing the fall of those beasts. And so we will highlight this again when we get to chapter 19 and beyond, is basically the way that this is set up in a literary device is he introduces all of these different characters, these different forces, these allies of Satan. And so he starts out with the dragon, and then he introduces the beast, and then he introduces another beast, and then he introduces those that are marked by the beast, and then there's the harlot. Well, now what's happening is he's going to deal with this harlot right here. He's going to explain more about that, and then we're going to move up to the marked, and then we're going to move up to the beast, and then the other beast, and then finally we're going to get to the dragon. So that's kind of the pattern that you're going to see. So pay attention to that as we're studying. So now if we look at these verses and see what is being taught, there's so much that we learn here. And the first thing we learn is, listen, the foes of Christ are real. This war, this spiritual war that's taking place is real. And this chapter is one of those chapters that begins to explain what these symbols are. See, this is something we've been saying the whole time that we've been in this study, going back to this slide that I show several times, is that this was written to first century Christians. This is full of symbolism, and you need to understand that this is to encourage Christians, not to scare them, not to scare people. The only people it should scare are those who are not Christians. And so as we consider that, we remember that you had those beasts. You remember you had the dragon. You had those two beasts. We talked about that from chapters 12 through 14, and then 15 and 16 were the 7 bowls of wrath. Well, now we get into that one of those 7 angels. There's the connection. When I said we're going to go into detail, he says one of those 7 angels who had the 7 bowls. All right, now we're going to get more into a microscopic level, if you will, to see some of those specific elements of the judgment. And so he says, and he came and he talked with me and says, I will show you. And then that's connected to verse 3 when he says he's carried away in the Spirit. Now we've seen that phrase many times already, that he was taken in the Spirit. In the Spirit. We got to remember, this is a vision. That's one of the first things you need to remember. This is a vision. And so therefore there's a lot of symbolism. And think about your own dreams that you have, and how sometimes things are just so incredible and so strange and not real. They're just images. And that's exactly what Revelation's all about. So he takes him, says, I'm going to show you the judgment of the great harlot. Now, when I introduced the 7 characters, the 7 symbolic figures, if I go back to this one right here, those 7 symbolic figures, that was the last one. That was the one at the very bottom, and it was just one verse and a quick mention. But it's still part of these 7 figures that we're dealing with. And now we get into who this is. And this is where Babylon is called that great harlot who sits on many waters. Now, if you were paying attention when we read, you saw at the end of the chapter, he explains what those waters are. If you look in verse 15, he says, those waters which you saw, where the harlot sits, here's the explanation. You might remember whenever we introduced the beast who rose up out of the water. You remember that? In chapter 13, the beast that come up out of the water, and we said those are nations, those are people. And you might have thought, man, how do they know that? And we mentioned that, 1, the Bible says it. 2, it's used in many different ways as far as symbolism, but it can't get any more clearer than the Spirit explaining this to John right here in verse 15. The waters which you saw are people. They are multitudes, nations, and tongues. See, that's one of the beautiful things about Revelation. You have all these pictures and all this imagery. If you'll just keep reading, if you'll just keep studying, it will explain it. And it'll tell you what these things are, and you'll be able to figure out. So this makes it pretty clear that, well, obviously we're talking about symbolism, because he didn't physically, actually, literally come up out of water, liquid H2O. This is symbolism for something that rose up out of people. All right, so I hope you're starting to see the imagery there. All right, and that's what you need to be thinking about when it comes to this harlot. So he goes on, and he says, sits on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth were made drunk. So, the word harlot is not a pretty word. It's a word that a synonym would be a prostitute. This is a term that is used in different parts of Scripture. But typically, the way that God uses that word is for the unfaithful, for the apostate people, the ones who don't have faith in God, who don't believe in God. They are the apostate people, the adulterous. And when you think about a harlot, they are adulterous. They're not a bride. All right, they're not a bride. They're not anything good. In fact, here being accused of some terrible sins. One is that they committed fornication with the kings. That's a sinful thing. And the inhabitants were made drunk. And so she's accused of seducing people into sin. Sin and more sin. And that's why she's depicted this way. So there are lots of pictures on the internet that you can get. Some of those that from Mrs. Smith there that we purchased, that first picture there. But then there's other pictures, a lot of different ways that people have depicted this harlot. This is one of the pictures, is one of my favorite pictures of just trying to get a good clean imagery of this, where you can see this vision that John is seeing. Because look how he describes the harlot as we're looking at this. And so he goes into the wilderness and he sees this woman, a woman sitting on a, notice, scarlet beast. Give him some colors to that beast. And remember, we talked about the word red and scarlet, clearly blood. And why do we know that? Because it talks about how she was stained with the blood of the martyrs there in verse 6. So it's full of the names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. So there's that picture. You have this woman sitting on this beast with those 7 heads. If you go back to that picture that we have, there's that beast coming up out of the sea there. You see it with those heads. So this is the same beast that we saw back in chapter 13, but now you have this woman sitting on top of the beast. They are intimately connected. They are part of each other. They work off of each other. They come from each other. And we're going to explain what we talk about with the 7 horns and 7 heads and 10 horns in just a moment. But the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet. Now those are colors of royalty and colors of luxury and things like that, and adorned with gold, precious stones, and pearls, and having in her hand a golden cup. And so when we focus in on that cup, just looking right at that cup, it says that cup that is full of the abominations and the filthiness of her fornication. So those were the methods that she used to cause people to sin. Those are the things that whatever she did that would draw people in to do sin, to be sinful. And it says that on her forehead was her name written. You know, history states that, and I've read in several different places, that ancient prostitutes had a headband that they wore where they had their name on there. And that's this imagery that we have, and it gives you the name of this particular harlot. And it's called Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and the abominations of the earth. I mentioned that the Bible uses this term quite often. And whenever you look at passages, like for example in Judges chapter 2, verse 7, God uses that imagery of his people playing the harlot. And what that means is that they have committed sin, and he calls them adulterous. You go to the prophet Hosea. The first 4 chapters is about the relationship between Hosea and Gomer, his wife, who plays the harlot. And that is a picture of what God's people have done. That they have, what's the word I'm looking for? Forsaken. They have forsaken God. They've been unfaithful. They've been disloyal. They have committed fornication with pagan idols and gone after other gods and things like that. And that's why he describes them as a harlot, describes them as committing adultery and being unfaithful. So this is the imagery that you get. So there's a whole lot packed into this. Not only is this representative of apostate people, but it's also seeing people causing other people to sin. They enjoy it, because you see that in verse 6. It says, I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints. She enjoys it. You overindulge in something. And so that's why this is scarlet and all this blood, the martyrs of Jesus. And I saw her and I marveled. She enjoyed doing what she was doing. Paul writes about that in Romans chapter 1. At the end of Romans chapter 1, he's talking about people who are sinful, the different people who will not inherit the kingdom of God. And he says, who, knowing the righteous judgment of God, that those who practice such things, talking about sin, are worthy of death, not only do the same, but they also approve of those who practice them. That's this harlot right here. That's what indicates or describes this harlot. She enjoyed seducing mankind into sin, pulling them away from God. And so that's why there's blasphemies. That's why all this. Now, it mentions her name. It says her name is Babylon. Now, Babylon was first used back in chapter 14 whenever we studied those 7 symbolic figures. Here he's doing all the connections where she not only is Babylon, but she is a harlot and she's connected with the beast. Now, when you use the word Babylon, think about the first century Christians. They know the scriptures, they know the Old Testament, they know the history. And the first thing they're going to think of is that pagan city, Babylon, the city where they were carried off into captivity. Babylon is not a good thing. It does not represent goodness. And so if this is a symbol, using Babylon, the actual city Babylon was a terrible city, one that destroyed destroyed Judaism back when Nebuchadnezzar was king, carried him off into captivity. If that's a symbol, then they're automatically going to make the association and the connection with the city that would be equivalent to it in its own day, which would be Rome. And so there's an allusion here to Rome. But then also it says that this is, by the way, it says mystery, comma, Babylon the Great. That comma shouldn't even be in there. That's her name, Mystery Babylon. So there's this spiritual element of Babylon. Remember, this is symbolism. So there's all kinds of things that are in play here with this name. Okay. So it says that you see this picture of this woman. And you need to understand there's a parallel that's going on here. Notice that John says he marvels with great amazement. Don't get confused there. John's not mesmerized by this woman. Although she is beautiful, she has to be. She has to be attractive. She has to be what is easy to seduce men, because that's what is implied here. Have you ever really thought about that? We always paint pictures of Jesus as so beautiful and so becoming and handsome and everything. And we always paint Satan as ugly, and he's got those horns and that tail and the pitchfork and all that stuff, and he's hideous. Really it's just the opposite? If you really stop and think about it, Isaiah 53 says that Jesus has no form or comeliness that we should desire him. He was just very plain, blended in. There was nothing that really caused us to be attracted to him. But yet, the world is attracted to Satan. He must be the most beautiful individual or living being there ever was, because people are attracted to him. Mankind is naturally attracted to beauty. And that's what you see in this harlot, is that she attracts people to her and she seduces them to sin. And so when he says he marvels, he's not intrigued with her. He is aghast. He is sickened. He can't believe his own eyes. That's what the word means here. And he can't believe it. It's the most horrible, terrible thing to think of this woman that is drunk on the blood of dead Christians. That's a terrible scene. So that's what's happening. But the angel said to me, why? Why are you feeling that way? To paraphrase right there. Why are you feeling that way? I'll tell you the mystery of the woman. So here he's about to begin the explanation of this woman and the beast that carries her, which has the 7 heads and the 10 horns. So here, the Bible's going to start explaining things. The beast that you saw was and is not. Now, that's a great phrase, and it's there on purpose because of the inspired writing here. But do you remember how Jesus is described? He that was and is and will be. Here, you see this, the beast that was and is not. In other words, it's just the opposite of what we see with Jesus. And that's what you need to notice when you have all these parallels. One thing I failed to mention, but I'm going to take you back there right now, is, the Bible mentioned another woman. In Revelation chapter 12, John mentions that woman, you remember, that was arrayed in the sun and was beautiful and everything. This is not the same woman when we get over here to chapter 17 and looking at the heart. This is completely the opposite. This is about as opposite as you can get. You see, that woman that gave birth to the child, she was a virgin. The woman here in chapter 17 is a harlot. Whenever you look at this woman, you see that woman was associated with the lamb in chapter 12, but this woman is associated with the beast. You look and you see that she was arrayed with the sun, but this one is arrayed with gold and all these luxury earth materials. Excuse me with the microphone there. You see that the woman in chapter 12 was the one being persecuted, where this woman, the harlot, is persecuting the Christians. This woman winds up going into perdition, whereas the woman in chapter 12 winds up going into heaven. So big difference. And that's really important to understand, because remember we showed you this where we took those comparisons and we talked about this basically Team God and Team Satan. And Team God has the Lamb, and he has the faithful, and he has those that are on his side, essentially, if you just want to put it that way. That you have the community. Remember we talked about Mount Zion and all that with the holy city of Jerusalem and things like that. And that's going to come back into play here when we get to chapter 20. Then on the other side, you have Satan and his allies. And one of those allies is Babylon. So you see those two women. You see those two communities. And that's what we're talking about here when we're talking about the different sides and allies and two different contrasts. So even the beast is being contrasted with Jesus, saying he was and is not, where Jesus is and always will be. And then he says, those that dwell on the earth will marvel, whose names are not written in the book of life. Now in my Bible, I have a little line that's between verses 8 and verse 2. You see, verse 2 tells you who these people are that are associated with the harlot. And here's another description of them in verse 8. Their names are not written in the book of life. Now that has already been discussed once. Whenever you go back to chapter 13, when we first saw these figures being introduced, and in verse 8 in chapter 13 it says, those that are of the beast do not have their names written in the book of life. And then that's connected with what we're going to see in chapter 20 verse 12, when he saw the great and the small standing before the throne, and the books were open, and one of those books was the book of life. Such beautiful imagery that the Bible uses to describe those who are of God and those who are not of God. And that's what all this is about. We're talking about people, the community that is not of God. That's Babylon. And he goes on to say, here is the mind which has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. Now, when we first introduced this figure back in chapter 13, we mentioned to you that there is all kinds of commentaries and thoughts and things like that. What is these 7 heads? It says the 7 mountains. And we commented also on the fact that if you go to Rome, even to this day, you can see from a topographical point of view that Rome, the ancient city, sat upon 7 different hills. Palatine Hill being the hill of the palaces, and so where the emperors lived, and then there's other 6 hills. And so, is that what this means? Well, you've heard me many times in this study up until now say that we can't look at all this stuff. It's symbolism, 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 and then all of a sudden go back and take one thing out and make it literal. And so this is a number. It is a number. Remember we talked about numbers and how important they are? And here, what's the numbers we have? We have the number 7. And we've talked about many times how that number 7 means complete. It means whole. It is perfection. And so like the 7 churches, we mentioned how those 7 churches were not the only 7 churches that existed in all of the empire or known world at that time, but those were the 7 churches that represent pretty much all churches that existed and have ever existed and will exist can be categorized into one of those 7 types of churches. 7 bowls of wrath, 7 candlesticks, 7 seals, 7 trumpets. All of that is to show perfection, completion, totality. It's a symbolic number. So, could the first century Christians reading this make the connection that number 7 represents Babylon, the city, which would be Rome, because Rome is on 7 hills? Yes, absolutely, they can make that connection. But what you see here is that sometimes there is fulfillment, a partial fulfillment, that the connection would be made. But remember, this is talking about spiritual things. Let's just break it down to reality. Is Babylon an actual, literal harlot riding on a beast? You see, it starts to get absurd whenever you back up and look at, remember, this is a vision. It's a dream. So, yes, you can make a connection, a partial fulfillment with it being Rome. That's probably what the first century Christians did. But they also understood that this is talking about spiritual things, in which case this represents, just like those 7 churches represent all churches, this represents all cities. Any and all city that is anti-God is equal to this Babylon. It's symbolism. So yeah, there's going to be a connection, but the main message that still applies to us 2,000 years later is that any city that is anti-God is like this. And then it goes on to talk about these horns, all right? It says, there are also 7 kings, 5 are fallen, 1 is, and the other one is yet to come. When he comes, he must continue for a short time. Again, the number 7 showing all rulers. There's a lot of commentaries out there, and this is all fine, speculation and stuff like that they start listing all the kings and following all the different Caesars and stuff like that. Again, all fine and good, but what's the main message? Same way with those 7 churches, same way with the 7 hills, meaning all cities. These are any and all rulers, any and all kings who are anti-God. Continues. And the beast was and is not as himself, also the 8th. And so it shows that, see, there's symbolism. Even the beast himself is one of these kings. And so you see that happen in history. It's happened a few times where, for example, in history, whenever Rome went away, then you had the Catholic Church come in, the Holy Roman Empire rise in power. All of a sudden, the Pope is the most powerful person in the world. And then, of course, that has changed again. We go in cycles. And so that's the picture you need to see here, is it's all governments. Now, I love what it says here, and it says, and the beast that was and is not is himself also the 8th and is the 7th, is going to perdition. Notice it says that each time. It's going to perdition. In other words, he's not going to have success. We know who wins in the end. It's God. He's going to fail. He's not going to have much success. And the 10 horns, which you saw, are 10 kings who have received no kingdom as of yet. All right, once again, people look at these numbers and they start calculating, no, that would be emperor this and emperor that. There's all kinds of arguments about, well, was this Nero or was this Diocletian? Was this written before or after AD 70? And those are all wonderful discussions, and I love those discussions, and I find them fascinating, and I appreciate people's ideas and attitudes and opinions on those, but that's all it is. It's speculation. We don't know for a fact when the date was. We don't know for a fact what he's referring to here. All we know is that this was written to first century Christians. That's still in the Bible for us to encourage us today. And once again, you have like these, I keep doing that, these numbers over here. 10 is one more number that simply means a time. It is an indefinite multiplicity. Listen, there's this, if you go too literal, you start running into problems, because the Roman Empire ended around 476 AD. And so if you start counting, well, now you've got to figure out, well, what 10 kings are we talking about here? Are we talking about the kings in Germany? Are we talking about the kings in Russia? Are we talking about the king? You see, that's not the point. The point is it represents all anti-God rulers, kings. And notice the description that it gives. Be given power and authority to the beast, all right? And it says in verse 12, the authority for 1 hour. Authority for 1 hour. Can you imagine being king, being made king for 1 hour? If you break it down into our political landscape, imagine that you're made president of the United States for 1 hour. What does that mean? Nothing, right? What can you really do in 1 hour? And that's the point, is it is minuscule when compared to eternity, because how long is Jesus' kingdom going to last? How long is Jesus going to rule? It's for eternity. See, there's that comparison again. Always these contrasts and that comparison that he shows in there. So it says they'll receive authority, and then they are one mind that will give their power and authority to the beast. So this shows how that there's that intimate relationship between a government and the apostate people, that they're all interconnected. And you think about that's the way it typically is. Whenever you have anti-God governments, there's going to be lots of people that are anti-God as well. That's this community, Babylon, the great harlot. And then verse 14 is kind of like a little parenthesis in here that is basically a description of the entire book of Revelation. If you want a one-verse summary of the entire book of Revelation, of everything that we've studied, if you want it all broke down into one verse, this would be it. These will make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb will overcome them, for he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and those who are with him are called, chosen, and faithful. See, that's what this is all about. The whole book is about this spiritual war, that Satan and his allies are making war with God and his allies, God, his Son, and his allies. He is persecuting the church. That's what the Christians are experiencing in that day and age. But it's saying the Lamb is going to win. We're going to see that at the end of the book. The Lamb wins. God wins. And so therefore, he says he's going to win because he's Lord of lords and King of kings, and those that are with him are called. That's an important point. You're called by the gospel. That's what the gospel is for. And so we are called to God. We are chosen. That's sometimes that is written out as elect. And what that means is that if you obey that gospel call, then you become one of God's chosen people, part of this plan that he's had since the foundation of the earth. And then faithful. That's the opposite, the contrast of Babylon, the apostates. And if you think back in Revelation chapter 2, verse 10, when he says, if you remain faithful till death, I'll give you the crown of life. And over, this book keeps telling us to remain faithful. God's going to win. All this that you're seeing has a reason, and this is what's happening. So he goes on and explains that verse about the waters, and that's basically the whole world. Everybody in the world who is unfaithful. Everybody who does not obey the gospel. 2 Thessalonians chapter 1, verses 7 through 8, when it talks about that he's going to have vengeance upon those, and he says in there, who do not obey the gospel. That's who these waters are. That's who the people are, these multiplicity of nations. There's nobody exempt. There, just as there is no man or woman, free or slave, there is no Greek or Jew or anything else when it comes to Christianity. Well, the apostates includes everybody also. And he goes on and he says, the 10 horns which you saw on the beast, these will hate the harlot and make her desolate and naked, and eat her flesh, and burn her with fire. See, that's the result. How many times have you ever seen in history, and even sometimes in history today, when you see governments that implode, they wind up, they eat their own. You see that in the animal kingdom sometimes, where an animal will come in and it'll be dominant and they'll eat their own. And so it turns upon itself. The very beast that harlot is riding on, she came out of the beast. And the beast came out of her. They're interconnected. And that beast now turns on her and devours her. Such powerful imagery that you see there. Why? Why is all this going on? Because God put it in their hearts to fulfill His purpose. Now, again, first century Christians wouldn't be surprised at seeing this. We mentioned, and we've been talking about Babylon, and I mentioned that in their history they would recognize that they were, their ancestors. Many of the first century Christians were Jews, which means that their ancestors were carried away into captivity to Babylon. And that God put it in Nebuchadnezzar, King Nebuchadnezzar's heart, to come down to Israel and punish his people. You see, God is in control. God, you see that in Romans chapter 13, He puts people into positions of power. God is in control. This is a God is in control verse. For He put it in their hearts to fulfill His purpose, to be of one mind, to give their kingdom to the beast until the words of God are fulfilled. Man, such an encouraging verse. God's in control. And so, there's this terrible, terrible woman. There's all these people, the apostate people, the unbelievers, the unfaithful, those who don't obey the gospel, and they're described as a harlot, this community called Babylon, riding upon that beast that came up out of the sea, that beast that came up out of the people, those governments and stuff, and uses the government to enact their terrible deeds. But this verse shows that God's in control, and that's what you need to take courage in. And so, until it is fulfilled. And the woman whom you saw is that great city which reigns over the kings of the earth. Now, we've said many times this is symbolism. So what that means is this is any city that is anti-God. Doesn't stop with Rome. I know that the first century Christians, they're going to make that connection that this is Rome. And they're going to look at that and they're going to say that's who's persecuting them. What about the people who were being persecuted in the year 600 A.D.? What about the people being persecuted in 1000 A.D. or 1500 or 2020? You see, this still gives us encouragement because we can still identify Babylons today. We can still see that community of the apostates, the community of people who don't believe in God and who are anti-God. So that's chapter 17. And that's just an introduction showing you that this seventh figure that we introduced back in chapters 12 through 14 is more detailed and explains the symbolism behind it. And what we're going to see next week whenever we continue our study in chapter 18 is we're going to see that she's already been condemned. We're going to see how that's carried out. And then when we get to chapter 19, we're going to see that this judgment continues. God doesn't stop with her. He's just getting started. That's the vision that John has right now, is this final view of judgment. And so going back to our outline there, so you'll see that let me go ahead and take you all the way back to this one, the overview outline. You'll see that in this we have this sevenfold judgment. And there's one left after this, and that's the sevenfold victory. And so this is all building up to a climactic end. I thank you so much for joining me tonight here in the auditorium at the Market Street Church of Christ. Again, a little change of scenery. Simply easier with the audio and video system that we have. I hope that it has worked out the same as when I was in my office. We'll eventually go back to my office in the future, but hopefully you're able to follow along and hear as well and see the pictures and everything as well. I thank you for joining me with this study. I hope it's been beneficial to you, and I hope you're growing and you're getting to know more about God, about the Son of God, and that hope of eternal life that we have. So I appreciate you being with us. I hope you have a great rest of your week. Don't forget to pray for baby Bearden coming up real soon, and we will see you next week. God bless.